Hello again everybody, and welcome back to another Decode Tech video. So we're finally getting into the project that I've been talking about for some time now, and this is going to be an intermediate series, so I'm assuming you have at least a decent understanding of all the topics in my basic series, and if you haven't seen that, you can check that out. I'll link it somewhere. Of course, you can always go back and brush up on the topics you didn't understand very well or are a little foggy on, since it may have been a little while ago that you watched the video on that or learned about that topic. And this video specifically is going to be a brief introduction to the outline of the course and explain why I chose the technologies I did and what they are, how they work, and all that kind of stuff. You should be able to follow the series on any of the major operating systems, Windows, Mac, or Linux. And if you stick around to the end, I'll show you how to get a very basic GUI window up and running. Now, before I start, I'm not an expert on any of this by any means, but I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of it, and this is accurate to the best of my knowledge. But if you see that I'm wrong, please let me know in the comment section down below. So let's get started. Alright, so we're going to start with the GUI. And if you watched my last video, you know that we're going to use the tkinter Python module. Now, this is built into Python, so we don't have to install it in any way, which is nice. And it's a Python binding to the TK GUI toolkit. Now, this TK GUI toolkit is free and open source and cross-platform widget toolkit, and cross-platform basically means it runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. From what I understand, Python doesn't talk directly to TK. There's another language called TCL, which is also a high-level language, kind of like Python. It's interpreted, and it's commonly used with TK, and you often see it abbreviated like this, TCL/TK. And then tkinter is implemented as a Python wrapper around a complete TCL interpreter. So a TCL interpreter is embedded in the Python interpreter. So kind of how it works is tkinter calls are translated into TCL commands, which then are fed to this embedded interpreter. But the great news for us is we don't need to know any TCL. So tkinter will be the front end of our application. Moving on to step 2, we'll start to talk about the database, and we're going to use SQLite for that. So SQLite is what is known as a database engine. Other examples you might have heard of are Postgres SQL, Oracle, and Microsoft SQL Server, and there's many others as well. And then all of these database engines use a language called SQL, which stands for Structured Query Language. And all these databases store our information in what are known as tables, and you can think of tables as kind of like a spreadsheet type structure, but they're much more capable and sophisticated than that. So why I picked SQL specifically is, unlike most of the other database management systems, it doesn't require a server, which means the setup is very simple. Also, it's used by almost all operating systems. In other words, you could kind of call it cross-platform, just like tkinter is. And lastly, it has really nice integration with Python, although a lot of other databases have integration with Python as well. And this will be considered the back end of our application. And then finally, in step 3, we will connect the front end and the back end using a built-in Python module called SQLite 3. This will allow us to connect to the database from Python and run queries straight from our Python, which is just what we need. So I will be making a sales stock inventory system, but you can either follow along with what I'm doing, or you can take these principles I'm teaching as far as getting data from a GUI and storing it and then redisplaying it, and you can make your application do something you are more interested in, because you tend to learn better and faster that way. Also, I am planning to store the code on GitHub, and I will link it below. But I'm not intending this to teach Git in GitHub, but if you already know how to use it, you can download the code and mess around with it. And you could also learn GitHub on the side on your own if you want. So before I end the video, I'm going to open up VS Code, and I've started a new folder called Store Manager, and I made a file called main.py. So now to work with tkinter, since it's a built-in module, we don't have to use pip to install anything. We can just say import the name of the module, which is tkinter. And one thing to note is if you're using Python 2, it's actually tkinter with a capital T instead of a lowercase t, and that does make all the difference. But you really should be using Python 3 and not Python 2, so let's use the lowercase. And then, so I don't have to spell out tkinter all the time, I'm going to say as tk, and that's a pretty common thing to do. Now, tk works with what are called widgets, and the main window is often referred to as root. So we're just going to make a variable called root, and so since it's a variable, I use the assignment operator, and I need to refer to the tk library by typing in tk because we said as tk. Now I want to go inside of that library and get an object, so I'm going to use the dot operator, and this is also called tk, so that can be a little confusing. But since it's an object, it's a capital T, and also since it's an object, we need to use parentheses to instantiate that object. So don't be confused by this. This is going into the TK module and getting us the TK object. And then of course storing that object back in root. And then in 3 lines of code, so we're going to write one more line of code, we can get a very basic window up and running with tkinter. And how we're going to do that is call our main window object, root, and then we're going to call a method. Remember, a method is just a function tied to an object, and it's called main loop. And since it's a function, it needs open and close parentheses to call it. And basically what main loop does is it's an event loop that just keeps running, listening for any events while the window is still running. So I'm going to save this code. I'm going to go down to my terminal and I'm going to type in python main.py. Hit enter. And you should get a little window appear somewhere on your screen. It might not always appear at the same spot, but you should get a window that looks something like this. If you're on Mac OS, it should look more like a Mac app, or if you're on Linux, it should look more like a Linux app, but I'm on Windows. Now this is a window object, and it has some nice functionality right out of the box. You can resize it, you can make it bigger by hitting the full screen button, or you can minimize it, but I want to open it back up, make it smaller. And you see the little feather icon there in the corner, that's tkinter's icon. And it has a title called TK, and we can modify all these different attributes of this window. So you can think of this window as an object with attributes and methods. And of course, we'll get more into that as the series progresses. So if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you're interested in learning more about this. Leave any questions or comments down below, and I hope to see you in the next video. God bless.